There are a lot of reasons why players are so deeply invested into playing World of Warcraft, and if you're like me, a large portion of that reason rests within the game's rich and extensive lore, a lore which grows and develops with each expansion. And if you're truly like me, you have experienced the journey of all of the expansions to date, and you were there to witness Warcraft's story at its greatest as well as at its worst. And if you have played BFA, then I'm sure that I'm making no mistake when I say that your experience with the latter situation is most likely still fresh. You see, Blizzard decided to take a very unsafe approach in their attempt to create and bring life to the story of BFA, an act which came at a very precious cost. And what was the payment? Blizzard's purchase order received for what they've done lists these two: narrative structure and narrative theme. A narrative structure refers to the content of a story and the form in which it is told. In other words, it is the foundation atop of which the story is built and arranged, and the order in which it is arranged is later presented to us. A narrative theme is basically the topic of the story. Ever since the dawn of World of Warcraft expansions, Blizzard would always offer a clear demonstration of what the theme of the next expansion was about. This mostly happened in the form of CGI cinematics. For example, when we saw for the first time the cinematic trailer for the Burning Crusade expansion, what effect did that have on us? We could hear Illidan speak at the beginning of the videos. We started feeling confident that he was going to be the star of the show, and that immediately drew our minds to making connections on what else the story would involve. Alright, so I'm thinking Illidan. That makes me think of Outland. Boom, now we know the geographical setting in which the story will play out. Lady Vash, Naga, Kel'Thas Sunstrider, Blood Elves, McTheridan, Fell Orcs, Illidan's failed pact with Kil'jaeden. Boom, the Burning Legion. There's your idea on what the theme will be about. Same thing with the Cataclysm. When we saw Deathwing emerge and leave a trail of catastrophic ruin wherever he went, we got a clear idea of what the theme of the story was going to be. Deathwing was the antagonist. We have to stop him, and the damage inflicted upon the world made the setting. Cinematics and other kinds of trailers are therefore quite essential because of the role they play by giving us an idea of what the expansion's theme is about, and therefore we are allowed to form an emotional connection with it. This is what helps prepare us for the journey, and it also gives us a vague idea of what might be the possibilities when the story starts playing out. The cinematic which showcased the battle for Lordaeron was a downright clear indicator that a faction war was going to be the central focus. And if you combine it with the idea behind the two epilogue cutscenes from Legion, one in which Sylvanas is informed of the existence of Azeroth, you would think that the theme hints to some sort of large arms race. Even the premise for the burning of Teldrassil describes that Sylvanas wanted to attack Teldrassil so as to cut off the alliance from Kalimdor to the Eastern Kingdoms so that she could control the flow of Azeroth. Yet we've barely seen anything that would resemble an arms race. At best, each side only created a handful of vehicles which used Azeroth as ammunition. That's it. This is one of the few aspects of BFA's lore that was never followed up on in a meaningful way, and as a result, the emotional connection we had built with the expansion's theme was compromised. Unfortunately, it gets worse. Long story short, Blizzard decided to wrap up and end the theme of the expansion early. Too early. This means that they had to scale it down, which is why, as a result, a lot of people felt that things were being rushed. Then we became witnesses to what I think was a complete fatality. The gap which is usually reserved for the end of the story was filled with an absolutely different theme. What this means is that on top of the framework, they squeezed in another narrative structure, one that had to be scaled all the way down so that it could actually fit in the remaining space. This is a move which I like to call narrative mutilation. This ends up hurting the connection that players have formed with the original story since the beginning of the expansion. It leaves them feeling betrayed and disappointed, deprived of the opportunity to enjoy a full story. And it's even worse when the entire ambience of the end cinematic desperately tries to evoke this sense of a hard-earned victory, like some sort of long sigh of relief after a long time of struggle and hardship that you had to work hard hard to overcome. You can hear it in the music, disregarding the fact that it sounds very similar to Lord of the Rings. The instant you realize that this celebrates this, then it comes off as outrageously conceited. In other words, having an over-exaggerated opinion of how important it thinks it is, as if it's trying to tell us how we should feel, and if we're not doing it the way they want, then we are wrong. This is what I think dramatically hurt BFA's story. Blizzard sacrificed the natural form and length of a narrative structure that all of us have been used to seeing for over a decade, so they could tell a separate story in the end, and by doing so, the main theme of the story ended up quickly running out of room to breathe. Now you might argue that the Rise of Azshara patch was the lead-in to the second story of the expansion, that it was Blizzard's attempt to help us quickly form an emotional connection with N'Zoth's theme, and alongside with it, using the name of the expansion, Battle for Azeroth, as an indicator that a fight with N'Zoth actually fits. For some people it probably worked, but the idea of confronting N'Zoth as the end boss, knowing that N'Zoth was never given a proper build-up within BFA's narrative structure, left many people feeling apprehensive. As a result, the emotional connection became compromised. It became weak as you started seeing the story being scaled down and juggled, and before patch 8.3 released, you most likely wondered, how is N'Zoth even going to play out? Is it going to be meaningful? Am I going to enjoy it? Well, you have seen it, and this was the consequence of Blizzard's narrative negligence. The unhinged old god to whom was given the credit of once signing Deathwing's paychecks, so powerful and so catastrophically dangerous to all life on Azeroth, can only afford to attack 2 zones. No, wait, I'm sorry, only 1/3 of 2 zones. This creates the impression that in actuality, N'Zoth's power is only a shadow of how he had been described. In addition, the solution to beating him was something that we have come up with in the span of a few hours, which creates the impression that the threat of N'Zoth is pathetically easy to deal with. Patch 8.3 was a death row for N'Zoth's character as a result. The lack of a wholesome framework on top of which he was put damaged the integrity of his character. It's even worse when you know that N'Zoth was someone who had been teased for a long time prior, only to see him become so cruelly mistreated. It's not that different from having saved up money for over a decade to buy yourself an expensive car. You get the car, you rev up the engine, you go out for a ride. 1 minute later, 3 dudes crash into you from 3 different sides. There is one thing, however, which I think most of us can glean from this situation. I suspect, and this is my personal opinion, that the fatal outcome of patch 8.3, as well as how the Eternal Pals raid had attempted to pave the way for Ny'alotha, was a product of fear. Ever since the beginning of BFA, since the pre-expansion scenarios that involved the attacks on Teldrassil and Lordaeron, the WoW forums had been proliferating with one atrocious phrase, which many did not use lightly in context: Garrosh 2.0. You see, despite the fact that Sylvanas was the fulcrum upon which the main theme of the expansion was swinging, her role and involvement in the narrative, no matter how much you hate to hear it, made her the one and only candidate for the role of BFA's end boss, if not the most perfect candidate. However, I believe to this day that the reason Sylvanas wasn't the end boss is because Blizzard caved in. The dissatisfaction so deeply embedded within the Garrosh 2.0 concept, channeled across social media along the lines of Siege of Orgrimmar all over again, like some mad refrain that you're tired of hearing again and again because you've already heard it once, more than once, must have surely come off as discouraging. Truth be told, it never had to come to that. With the way how things played out, Thunder Bluff was made ripe for a potential final raid of the expansion. Yes, the name of the raid would most likely involve the word siege, and I'm sure many people would start setting the forums on fire just to point that out. But would it really be the same? In Siege of Orgrimmar, we assumed the role of attackers. In Thunder Bluff, we could have been the defenders. This is where Saurfang could have had his little Magora challenge with Sylvanas, later to expose her and die, just like he originally certainly did. Furthermore, and this is more of a cherry on top, Blizzard had actually invested resources to wrapping up the expansion's main theme with a fully pre-rendered CGI cinematic. If we had gotten Siege of Thunder Bluff, maybe, just maybe, we could have been treated for the first time ever with a fully pre-rendered CGI cinematic as the end cinematic of the expansion. 8.3 could have also been Blizzard's chance to remedy some of the issues with Sylvanas' character. Right now, she's very mysterious, to the point where a lot of people wonder whether the writers themselves know what to do with her. So 8.3 could have been the opportunity to provide some much needed clarity, and in my opinion, as well as some extra dose of energy to make her current and future story arc feel a bit more meaningful and comprehensible, and also a chance for Blizzard to show us how thick is the line that separates Sylvanas from Garrosh. So, there we have it. My disappointment personally lies in not what BFA's story was, but what BFA's story wasn't. Nevertheless, all we can do now is look towards the future. And the future is called the Shadowlands. So far, it seems promising. The art team as ever is performing at peak level, maybe better than ever actually, and I'm really impressed myself with the visuals. However, one thing still remains a mystery. We have yet to know how Blizzard will approach the narrative structure of the Shadowlands, and if you remember how I talked about the importance of cinematic trailers and the role they play in setting us up for the theme, well, it doesn't look good. This cinematic made it clear that the Shadowlands is where we're going, a place of unknown. There is a similarity here shared by Mists of Pandaria actually, because Pandaria was also an unexplored landscape, and mysterious as well, but I think we can all agree that the Shadowlands is even more so. We know that Sylvanas is involved as well as Bolvar, but as much as I tried to immerse myself in the cinematic so I could get an idea on what kind of theme it's trying to suggest, I couldn't do it. I was too busy keeping my eyebrows raised and asking myself, why is Sylvanas so freakishly strong, or if Bolvar was that humiliatingly incompetent as we have seen. In fact, the cinematic almost gave me PTSD. Why? Because I saw a pattern here. Bolvar and Ny'alotha, both characters with a long time of hype behind them, and then when we get to see them in action, it's like watching cardboard trying to put up a fight. And listen, I know you can probably come up with tons of explanations to help justify what the end cinematic showed us, but the cinematic is a trailer. It's meant to hook you in to the theme of the expansion, get you excited for what's to come. It is not meant to distract you and make you second think what you're seeing. So far, first impressions, mixed feelings. Hopefully the tragedy of Battle for Azeroth's narrative structure, as well as the damage it caused to the stories it tried to tell, will serve as a warning sign to those who write the story, rather than a warning sign to us on what to expect from Blizzard's story-building approach in the future. Nevertheless, I hope that the issues I've addressed here have helped give you a better understanding on what went wrong from a fundamental perspective. And speaking of perspective, that is going to be the topic of the next video. Specifically, narrative perspective. In other words, the point of view from which a story is communicated. Therefore, I have labeled this video as part 1, so stay tuned for part 2. And after that, part 3. Not going to tell you what part 3 will be about yet, but chances are that it's most likely going to disappoint you a bit. Not my fault though. Anyway, thank you, and as ever, my friends, until another time.